Hey, folks. Good morning.
Good morning, David. Trying to bring up.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good
Good morning,
morning.
Timothy. Yesterday was an absolutely wild ride in the markets overall, in oil for sure. It was the biggest top to bottom move, percentage wise, dollar wise, in history with respect to oil. With respect to markets, also major comeback. Two lessons to be taken from this: either A, you do this as a full-time job. Alternatively, if you don't do this as a full-time job, you let somebody else who's professional and does this full-time to do it for you. Or the other option is to not trade this market on a day-by-day basis, or even hour by hour, certainly. It's just too much going on. Too many sound bites. Too many headlines that can move everything all at once. We ended yesterday in the green. There was a rally this morning. It's faded. Things are generally flat. Crypto even had a strange day yesterday. Strong in the morning through the early afternoon, then gave it all up, then strength overnight. Bitcoin significantly above 70,000 now. So it's been the leader, even though yesterday it was not the leader in terms of percentage gain during trading hours. As far as war headlines, I'm guessing that most people have seen the same headlines that I have seen. Where we are right now, we will leave that to Velina to talk to us about. Before Velina starts, I'll wait for the room to fill up a little bit. By the way, change of clocks clearly affecting our speakers and our audience. So we will give folks a little bit of time to go ahead and wake up. But a couple of pieces of news that came out right when we were wrapping up yesterday to go over. Live Nation, I think I mentioned at the end of the show. So Live Nation, which I think was probably the DOJ antitrust strongest case that exists in the current docket and active prosecution in terms of large cases, is now going to end in a settlement. The settlement is that Live Nation will not need to divest Ticketmaster for all those that are consumers of live performance in the audience, including myself. This sucks. They will continue to have a stranglehold over the industry. Essentially, the settlement is that 13 venues that had exclusive ticketing deals with Ticketmaster will become open to other primary ticketing agencies. So there will be some level of competition at some important venues. What this signals, if you're an antitrust lawyer, what this signals to you is you could pretty much do anything with this administration. Certainly, you need to be on the right side of the administration. You need to have the right lawyer and the right lobbyist. But essentially, you can push almost anything through. This is that Live Nation Ticketmaster does generally have a stranglehold on live events in the United States, if not abroad as well. And this settlement will now leave them with that space. It's absolutely an incredible win for Live Nation. If you're long LYV, congrats. If you're not long yet, the stock didn't rocket up. I mean, it had a good day, but they essentially have a monopoly, and it seems like a monopoly forevermore on it. The other kind of competitive, anti-competitive storyline was the news out of HIMS and Novo Nordisk. So, as you know, the majority of GLP-1s that are branded are produced by either Novo Nordisk or Eli Lilly. HIMS has been a seller of Wegovy, manufactured by Novo. Um, they ripped off the pill. They put their own, labeling on the pill, and this has all gone back and forth. Again, if you're not a, healthcare, pharmaceutical, regulatory person, how this all works and why this all makes sense is a little bit confusing. But let's just say that this is the way it is, that there is the primary producers, and then there are those that effectively use the same effective ingredients, but nevertheless are able to go ahead and sell it a lot cheaper in a lot different ways than the primaries. And HIMS has been on a yo-yo string with Novo for a long time. And it came out yesterday that these frenemies have effective, and they are frenemies, right? HIMS cannot exist without Novo. And you would think that the leverage in this conversation is in Novo Nordisk's hands, since they have the patent, since they produce the primary drug. But nevertheless, they ended up settling, and now Novo will sell its prescriptions. It will sell its product through HIMS. And so HIMS had a very high short interest on it, because, as I explained, it sounds like if all you are is a distributor, you really don't own anything. You don't own any intellectual property as it relates to the drug. Well, frankly, what kind of real moat do you have? What leverage do you have in the conversation with the primary producer and the holder of the intellectual property rights? P.S. What I don't know what stroke of genius negotiating there was. Novo has generally been playing second fiddle to Eli Lilly, and maybe Novo made a calculation that in order to go ahead and catch up with Eli Lilly, which is really Novo Nordisk's competition, not necessarily HIMS, it would be smarter for Novo Nordisk to make nice with HIMS in order to be able to sell much more volume, albeit at a lower price, through HIMS. And so HIMS stock rocketed yesterday off of the back of the news and probably a ton of short covering. We'll get to some more news after Velina speaks. Just wanted to mention one other set of earnings, which I've spoken about, and I don't think it was particularly shocking. Vail Resorts, MTN, largest owner of ski resorts in the world, owner of Vail, Beaver Creek, Breckenridge, Crested Butte, Park City, Keystone, and then many others across the world even. This has been one of the worst winters, lowest snowpack ever in the West. And they are guiding lower. I think I mean, you've heard me speak about this. This is something that's near and dear to my heart as an avid skier. I think they've broken the business model for skiing, but this goes ahead and really puts a big damper. They came out with earnings. They underwhelmed, and they went ahead and guided lower. The stock is not down a lot. I think down 5% after market close yesterday. I think that this story continues to get worse. Again, I think it's a sport that is cost prohibitive to a lot of people. They are trying for next year to reduce the price of season passes for Gen Zers. I don't know if that's going to go ahead and help them. At the end of the day, the money is made from the real estate and then from food services, not necessarily the lift tickets. And if you're a Gen Zer and you buy a pass at a cheap price, you're more likely than not going to brown bag it as opposed to paying $30 or $50, let's say, for a hamburger. So there is that. We'll see where that stock goes. Again, I am short. We'll talk about some other stuff afterwards, but Eric, why don't you go ahead and introduce Velina, and we'll start talking about Iran and the war.
Thank you very much, David. Welcome back, Velina, to the stage. For the audience, she has already been here once. She's a very, very astute geopolitician. Goes into a lot of details in what the economic impacts are, especially for this war. It is very important. Sorry, I lost a bit of my voice yesterday. And I thought it was a good idea to ask her to come back on the show because, as everybody knows, we're now in day 11, I think, of the war, and we had so many consequences. And there'll be more consequences as time goes by, if this lasts weeks, months. And so I asked her to come on the show and give a view to the audience. We'll have a little Q&A after. So with this, Velina, thank you very much for coming, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eric. Good morning and hello from Vienna, Austria. Hi to everyone in this space. Allow me just a few remarks on my side before I give you the short analysis. I come from the field of geopolitics and geoeconomics, no financial advice, obviously. And I have a very strict methodological and analytical framework to cover this kind of wars, military conflicts, and what I namely define as systemic risk. Iran is now the second systemic risk of war. Yes, you've heard it correctly, systemic risk because of the multiplicative effects coming out from this war. Next to the first such systemic risk being the Russian war on Ukraine. And we are already observing some similar behavior on the markets as well as in the global financial trade and economic systems. I can touch upon that a little bit later. Just to give you the idea, certainly not of the scale as the great financial crisis from 2007, 2008, when for the very first time systemic risks were defined, but certainly in the scope of what we observed during the pandemic, as well as I said already, starting with 2021, 2022 window for global markets and the global geopolitical environment. I will give you a very short geopolitical brief on what's happening right now when it comes to the war in Iran. And as I said, I can explain some of these multiplicative effects later during the Q&A so that we do not make it too long. Right now, where are we in the war? It started as a short US-Israeli campaign that aimed at three concrete dimensions. First dimension, decapitation of the political leadership and the spiritual leadership, which would trigger a regime change, but regime change coming bottom up, not top down, namely through the airstrikes, through the campaign, that the protests that were ongoing in Iran were supposed to trigger this regime change. Now, day 11 shows a very different picture. Despite the success of the decapitation campaigns, we are clearly observing strong signals coming from Iran in terms of stabilization of the political and the spiritual leadership. We have a new supreme leader who is the second son of Khamenei, who is certainly well accepted among the most important stakeholders within the leadership. We haven't heard anything from him yet, but as I speak right now, we have certainly a stabilization of the regime. At the same time, the US-Israeli campaign has now moved to a second stage, which is a long-term oriented campaign, military campaign. Now, when I talked about the dimensions, second dimension of this war was the destruction of the nuclear program of Iran. This was the same goal on behalf of Israel from the last escalation 2025, the 12 days escalation. And certainly, as of today, we cannot verify the success of this strategic goal, namely the full destruction of the nuclear installations and the nuclear program. Third important goal, which is important goal mostly for the Americans. So you clearly see also a gap between the Israeli and the American goals in this war. They are not fully overlapping, and that means 100% overlapping. On behalf of the Americans, a very important goal was right from the beginning the destruction of the ballistic missile program of Iran. Iran, meanwhile, being capable of shooting not just mid-range, but also long-range ballistic missiles, as we've been observing from the last 11 days. Not only drones, drone programs has been real-time tested thanks to the Russian war against Ukraine, where the Shahid drones have been actually at disposal from the very beginning. And here we can claim that if we take a look at the intensity of the Iranian attacks, missiles attacks, we can actually claim partial success. Now we have to wait actually for the concrete verification when it comes to the capabilities, ballistic and drone capabilities. It doesn't look like, as of today, that Iran is running out of capabilities, but it certainly has reduced the intensity and the scope and number of such attacks. So, of course, one plausible scenario for you, how this war ends, is for Iran to run out of ballistic and drone capabilities. Now, naval capabilities have been almost fully decimated, and more or less that has
Velina,
been also.
I'm sorry to cut in. In terms of their armament capabilities, are they expected to be getting replenishment from any of their allies, or is that impossible? And what do we know about replenishment until now?
We don't know much about replenishment as of today. It's very hard to verify this kind of military aid. And we had similar, and we are still having similar situation, for instance, with the Russian war on Ukraine, where, for instance, China has been a systemic sustainer of the Russian war effort, but mostly in terms of dual use. Goods and components. So there have been components which were also supplied for the military industrial complex, but we haven't seen a clear verification of, let's say, overt military aid for obvious reasons, which are that China wants still to play this neutral card for the international community. I argue that here we probably will see something similar. China doesn't want to be to be this overt systemic sustainer of Iran, even though that everyone knows very well that Iran is not just the most important oil supplier for China in the region, one of the most important ones, but also China is the most important material helper for Iran. So I expect that there would be deliveries, that there will be ways of trying to materially support Iran. Think of one corridor, one avenue is, of course, through humanitarian support. But I do not expect that we will see like specifically overt military aid to Iran. Now, intelligence is already being provided. The very fact that a lot of the strikes have been actually quite on spot was actually suspicious from the very beginning. And there have been already reports on intelligence sharing from Russia. Russia and Iran have a military pact. They have signed a military pact a few years ago. And now, of course, it's paying off for both sides. Iran, as I said, has been delivering the drones to Russia. So in that sense, you can also count it as military aid. Maybe a few more words before we go straight into the Q&A. That is the third dimension, which was, of course, I think is most relevant for you, not, I mean, the military developments and the war, the ongoing war is mostly interesting for security and military experts. But for you, of course, the big question is what the multiplicative effects of the closure of the practical closure of the Strait of Hormuz will mean for markets. I argue that the algos on the markets are still not getting actually the severity of these multiplicative effects. So these are what are multiplicative effects you remember from the time of the pandemic, when every day was basically leading to multiplicative effects from what was happening the day before. So it is simply impossible to predict the next stage of development because of the speed and the scope of change. That's the nature of systemic risks. They have a very high contagion effect, and they are spreading throughout the socioeconomic networks because of the interconnectedness of today's global system. They spread through the supply chains. They spread through, the vulnerabilities, but also interdependencies between all actors involved within the global trade and on the markets. And right now, the closure of Hormuz has been, I would argue, the most unanticipated component of this war right from the beginning. I would argue that actually the Americans and the Israelis were not counting on this, that the Iran would dare to do so. And of course, most of the analysts have also not factored in these effects. And now that we are in the 11th day, just for you to understand what it means in terms of duration, you will have to think in terms of the next 2 to 3 months at least. If the war would to end today, the implications will be felt at least for the next 3 to 6 months. So every next day of this war will increase the duration of the impact. So it is cascading in terms of, it starts with the commodities, energy, food commodities, fertilizers, and then it spreads to the components that you need for all the various critically important industries. It spreads also through the supply chains, and in the end, it's hugely felt in households, especially in weak economies or in sensitive economies. It's already starting today. As we speak, we have already the first manifestations of these multiplicative effects, such as fuel shortages in South and Southeast Asia. And of course, developed economies have more fiscal instruments to tackle. But again, if you take a look, for instance, at Europe, Europe has been already once in a similar situation in the period after 2021 up until nowadays. The Americans, of course, are having their own issues from the last several years. So even developed economies, the so-called G7 world, is going to face significant socioeconomic impact from this war. When we look at winners, of course, wars at that kind of scale have never winners, but right now, short term, the biggest winner, and I say really short term as of now, is actually Russia, because suddenly Russia has much better negotiation position for the upcoming ceasefire talks with the Americans and with the Ukrainians. Suddenly, the sanctioned Russian oil and the gas that is going to be diversified away, at least on behalf of the Europeans, it is still 13% share. They are now in demand. And by extension, Russia increases its leverage also towards China, because China now not being able to get, for instance, and even though that right now there are some oil shipments to China, but even in the situation of a full blockage for commodities going to China, China still has actually the biggest combined oil and gas supplier, which is Russia. And I will stop here because I suppose that there are a lot of questions.
Thank you very much. I see Carlo's hand up. Carlo, you have a question? Go
Yes,
ahead.
good morning, and thank you for sharing your insights. One of the things that I'm trying to understand in all of this from a global macro perspective is what is the ultimate end game for the United States? Obviously, the public facing position is that Iran was a threat to proliferate a nuclear weapon, and that's certainly not something that should be discounted. However, it appears that the broader strategic goal seems to be to choke off China from access to cheap oil. And increasing the price of oil and frustrating the supply chain does directly hurt China. And one of my concerns as an American is this sustained barrage of missiles and defensive measures that the United States is funding, both to protect Israel and to protect other countries in the region, is depleting the United States' weapon supplies, which are directly dependent on rare earth minerals. And my concern here, and I'd love to get your take on this, is China quietly sitting back and winning ultimately on the rare earth side without ever firing a single shot against the United States? And the broader conversation, are we entering into a multipolar world where the United States is essentially ceding the European front to Russia, the Asian front to China, and consolidating all of its attention and efforts into the North American, South American hemisphere? And the broader conversation about how rare earths play into all of this seems to be a long game that China is playing, in my opinion, because China has been spending decades building relationships in African nations, nation building in these places in exchange for extracting these rare earths. And is the United States in a vulnerable position now because of this?
Yes, there is a lot to unpack in your statements, and I will just wrap up the systemic framework I'm using. It might be helpful for some of you as well. In my case, I've been using this framework for more than 10 years now, which helped me to be quite ahead of the crowd in terms of geopolitical foresight. And indeed, it is, of course, also about China, but long-term oriented. In terms of long-term oriented strategy, of course, you have to keep in mind this war has operational dimension. I've explained a little bit of the operational dimension where we are right now. And this is the nasty thing about wars, that they never, ever go according the plan. So this is where we are, unfortunately, also with this war. Then there is a tactical level, which is, of course, what kind of weapons and ammunition is being used, what kind of operation, as well as with what kind of allies and partners. And, at tactical level, again, we are moving now towards a very different war. Similarly, if you remember, with the 1 week war, which was supposed to be only 1 week war, by Russia on Ukraine. And meanwhile, we are in the 5th war. And I'm not saying that this war will be lasting for 5 years, because the whole world will be dragged into an abyss if this war continues for a longer period of time. With the closure of the Hormuz. Hormuz cannot stay closed for a very long period of time, full stop. So that in itself gives you already a little bit of the strategic layer of these operations, which is that it put an additional pressure on everyone involved or not directly involved to engage in some sort of efforts towards ceasefire, at least. So that is what's going to happen, and that's what we have to observe for the next days and weeks. We have already received signals from individual countries, including China, who have called for ceasefire. China has also sent an envoy. Okay, that's also nothing new. They have sent an envoy also during the Russian war. against Ukraine, and what did this, envoy bring about? No change whatsoever. But these are important signals we have to consider. Now, going back to the strategic framework, I operate with a framework of new Cold War. It cannot be a World War III because of the fact of possession of nuclear weapons. We are no longer in a situation of 1918 or 1913. 39. We are not in this situation because the great powers that are in charge right now, and there is indeed a strategic competition between the Americans on the one hand and the Chinese and the Russians on the other, but they cannot get engaged in a direct kinetic confrontation against each other. They understand that. They send very strong and clear signals to each other that they will avoid such scenario, which is good for everyone. It's good for investors, it's good for traders, it's good for state actors, it's good for organizations, it's good for citizens. Okay, but that means, of course, that you have a threshold which no one is supposed or allowed to let's say, transpass. So it's a kind of a red line. This red line is for these countries, for these three countries, to not pass. That is the kinetic, the threshold of kinetic and nuclear exchange. Below this threshold, they are meanwhile engaging in severe full-scale competition with all means. And one of these means is, of course, kinetic. That is what I call basically the interconnected proxy wars from Ukraine, which is a proxy war between the Americans and the Europeans on the one hand, supporting Ukraine, and of course, the Chinese and the Russians. It has been the first proxy war between China and America. Now the second proxy war is actually Iran. And guess which the third proxy war will be? It's going to be the epicenter of this Cold War, which is the Indo-Pacific. Why is the Indo-Pacific the epicenter of the new Cold War? Because that's demographically and economically the epicenter for growth. Most of the countries from South Asia to Southeast Asia are the countries that are having a significant positive demographic picture, and demographic decline is omnipresent. It's everywhere right now, except for Africa. And then, of course, socioeconomic conditions. You're going to have a surging middle class, surging middle class, something similar to what happened in Europe in 20th century, which of course means consumption. Consumption means, of course, good news for markets and good news for revenue and for investments. And of course, in the framework of Cold War, where China and United States, but also Russia is already also involved there, they are not going to fight each other. They are going to create flashpoints. So, of course, Taiwan, South China Sea, East China Sea, you get the idea. So here, strategically, the main calculus was right from the beginning to close a chapter on Ukraine, which was the US administration's goal of Trump, to close the chapter on Ukraine, to get a ceasefire there, to close the chapter on Gaza, to get a ceasefire there, to solve the issue, as you rightfully pointed out, about the commodities, because they're not freely flowing. The whole idea of what we had from the last 30 years, that commodities and capital and labor and data and everything is actually flowing around the world, is actually no longer true. We are having we are facing a bifurcating global system. We have two different architectures with their structures, with their blocks, with their institutions, and so on and so forth. And of course, these flashpoints are positioned along the most important choke points. And in that sense, of course, the idea was to finally get Western-friendly regime in Iran that will ensure the flow of critically important commodities, not only for Iran, but actually for the Gulf states. Why? Because otherwise you cannot bring about all these kind of business initiatives that were promised with the Abraham Accords and now with the IMEC corridor. And this is the last point, IMEC corridor, because every single systemic competition, World War I, World War II, and now World War III, which is new Cold War, as I explained, were always about, first and foremost, what? About connectivity, about corridors, how you connect yourself as a global power to the rest of the world. And we know, United States maritime power So it's about the maritime choke points, but meanwhile, you cannot only be a maritime power. China is a hybrid maritime terrestrial power. Soviet Union was fully terrestrial, mostly terrestrial superpower. And in that sense, now, of course, this was, I think, main calculus, which is currently not being fulfilled as a goal. I'm not saying that the Americans will not be successful. We are just in the middle of the war. I'm just saying that we are moving towards a new phase of this war. Nobody can tell for a fact how long it will take, but in the end, it's really about also establishing this kind of control over critically important choke points. And by doing so, you can actually be the news that, let's say, you will be in charge of what kind of commodity is flowing, in which direction, and at what price.
Thank you very much, Velina. Does that answer most of your questions, Carlo? Do you have a follow-up
No,
question?
thank you very much. I appreciate a very detailed answer.
Anybody else on stage? Any questions, comments?
I have
Eladio's
yes.
hand is up. Go ahead, Eladio.
Hello, Velina. Thank you for your insight. When I look at this, Velina, though, I look at this in much more simple terms, and not from an ideologic perspective, the same way the neocons under George Bush and his vice president, which a lot of people thought was in charge, Cheney. I really think it's a mistake to think that Donald J. Trump is a neocon. The 12-day war certainly didn't result into something that was prolonged. When Barack Obama, nobody talked about the 1973 War Powers Act when Barack Obama basically bombed Libya for 3 straight years up to the last few days of his administration. So the War Powers Act is just the same usual political, side that the opposition takes. But I look at this from a very strategic. I think you're spot on. Indochina area, the South, the South Pacific area really is where most of the growing economies are. The two of the largest economies of the top 4 economies are there, China and India. I do think that Taiwan is going to go by the way of Hong Kong, and it's going to go peacefully at some point in the future through a negotiated settlement. I also think that eventually Russia will wise up because they are going to lose the regime. There's no way this regime stands. And if it does, it's a failure from a perspective of what Israel wants. For the United States, the only thing we need to get our hands on is that uranium, and it may require some type of personnel on the ground. But once we acquire those 460 kilograms of nuclear energy, nuclear fuel in the form of 60% uranium enriched, I think that's the biggest win. And frankly, if this lasts for about 5 to 10 years and there's unsettlement in Iran, which could probably last for that length of time, that really isn't as much of a concern to me. I just want them to only have BB guns when they say they want to close the Strait of Hormuz, and they won't have the power to do that. That's really the only really, really strategic goal the United States of America has, and to basically take Iran back to where they were in the copper age, and they won't have anything anymore to threaten all the allies. For 47 years, we've sat there and done nothing. So frankly, by the time they solve their problem, oil may not even matter anymore, because oil eventually will be on the way out with the technological advances that are coming down the pike. So frankly, Saudi Arabia has already woken up to the fact that they won't be able to stick a straw in the ground and take out oil and keep up with the rest of the world without AI. So again, right now, strategically, there are only 2 goals. Make sure Iran never has access to any type of nuclear fuel, and make sure that their military is about as strong as Madagascar's for the rest of our existence.
I suppose that this was a comment, and I should not.
Please, I'd like to
react
hear
to
your
each.
views, because America,
Okay.
America first means that we worry about our strategic, and every day you wake up in the future without an Ayatollah in the office is a good day for the world. That's so really things can't get worse than they've already gotten in the last 47 days. And we owe Israel a debt of gratitude for basically annihilating Hamas and eventually Hezbollah, all proxies of Iran. It's time to end the stupidity and the madness that has ensued since 1979 when these maniacal crazy nuts attacked our embassy. It's over. Game, set, and match. And we need to continue this until they only have BB guns to shoot at anyone.
Gladio, you have one comment there in what you said in your comments, which is it cannot get worse. It can get so much worse. And Velina, if you can elaborate.
Not really, not without a nuclear weapon. No, I disagree.
In terms of economic repercussions.
It doesn't matter, really. Like I said, that part of the world doesn't matter as much. Eventually, once we find other alternative sources, which we will, as honestly, it's time to move on. The Middle East is sand and desert, and eventually, as oil becomes less important, it will become less important.
I think we're confusing very, very long-term Eladio with the current situation in the world.
I could sleep better without Iran and a nuclear bomb. It's that simple.
Okay, Eladio is very American, a little bit, emotional, MAGA.
No, I'm actually realistic. Do you think it's good for Iran to have access to nuclear materials at any point from this point on? No.
You're talking about just that, or you're talking about the economic impact of the current war, which is what
you know what? Let them pound sand. Okay, because like I said, if they want Iran's military infrastructure and oil infrastructure to turn into what Hamas, what Gaza looks like, it's up to them. I really doubt this is going to last months in terms of the military campaign. The quagmire about leadership, it's their problem. For 47 years, we haven't had any type of semblance of leadership in that country that wasn't awful for the rest of the world. So how much worse can it really get?
Oh, it can get a lot worse.
Really? With what? With BB guns? Because they won't have anything to shoot. They don't have a navy.
Not about that. Economically, if the Strait stays as it is, or even some kind of mess.
It's not going to stay. That's the point. When you don't have anything, they won't be able to close, the Panama Gates if they had their whole military, because they won't have anything left. Do you see what my point is? Without a military, you're not very powerful. Without economic power, you're not very powerful. It reminds me of the Roman Empire in the 200s, where it almost fell. Remember in the 300s, we almost saw the Roman Empire fell after it started in the BC 27, and it lasted another 1,200 years. I get the feeling this is one of those moments for the Middle East, and unfortunately for them, the United States is still larger than China and India put together economically, still. And so, frankly, if there was time to actually play chess, it's now. Not sit there and say, oh, well, let's worry about their political situation from this point on. Really? Like if it was so great in the last 47 years, Eric? It's been a train wreck for 47 years. What are we going to wait for? What do you want to wait for, Eric? You want a red button with a nuclear bomb ready to go? Is that where?
Nothing that I want. We're talking about situation on the ground. And it could become a long proxy war quagmire. There's definitely a percentage of probability of that. I cannot tell you if it's 50%, less.
Maybe,
more.
But they only have sticks and stones to fight with, my friend. Sticks and stones.
That's a good question, actually. Velina, what are the probabilities? How much material support would China and Russia give to the Iranians?
I really don't care. They're losing the war. It doesn't matter. There won't be anybody to support.
Let her reply, please, to the question. Let's be logical and flow the questions. Yeah. Let me talk with Velina. Yeah? Just hang on, Eladio. That's a good question, Velina. How much support do you think the Russians and the Chinese each can give to Iran just to bog down the United States? Do you know? Do you have an idea?
There is no verified information on that specific question, because that's a question that everyone in our community wants to get answered. But just to be clear, when it comes to drone production, for instance, that's a very cheap production. And we should not compare incomparable things like what we, for instance, in the so-called West produce as weapons and ammunition in terms of final output. What's the price for it? You know, you take labor costs into consideration, you take the whole production process into consideration, and you compare it, for instance, with what China and Russia can produce or what Iran can produce. So this kind of destructive potential is there when it comes to cheap production. Now, when it comes to the ballistic missiles, that's of course something that bothers, you know, the military experts, because we haven't seen everything at what they have at disposal yet. Then, of course, the question is what else do they have? Because we haven't been in such a situation for the last 47 years. So it's a unique situation with a unique scenario, with a unique actors constellation. Yes, so for the time being, we can argue that Iran has been militarily defeated with aerial and naval superiority by the Americans and their allies, that's for sure. But again, strategic defeat is something very, very different. And we are not there yet. When it comes to tipping point for the regime, we should be mindful of the fact that these kind of regimes and these kind of systems, totalitarian systems, they undergo such moment when a tipping point is reached and they collapse, mostly implode. Think of USSR, think of other similar systems. So I have no doubts that this regime also is not going to survive. But I cannot give you a straightforward answer when this tipping point is reached, because the tipping point for regime collapse consists of or is a function of so many variables of different nature and character, and we have no solid information about all these variables. So this is where we are. This is what we have for the moment. Was Iran at its weakest moment to be attacked? Yes, of course. Given the decimation of its Iranian proxies in the region, given the 12 days escalation last year, given the new regional standing of Israel, absolutely. Was it a moment, let's say a strategic moment for the Americans to attack? Most likely. But again, you cannot also extrapolate from other successful operations. The overconfidence derived from the extraction operation in Venezuela cannot guarantee in itself success for the operation against Iran, because it's a very different scale of actor. And it's an actor that has a disruptive potential beyond its borders, not only in the region, but also in other parts of the world. It has networks, it has proxies, it has sleeping cells, and so on and so forth. Once Iran, and we are not there yet, once Iran is in a survival mode, once Iran is facing a situation now or never, make it or break it, and obviously right now they are more convinced that they could stabilize themselves politically, okay, but that's for today. Tomorrow it could be a very different picture, but once they are in a survival mode, they could also trigger such networks that are, for instance, in other parts of the world, for instance, in Europe. So they have the potential to disrupt. And we should be mindful of that. Will they use it? I cannot give you this answer. I don't know. I don't know as of today. We are just observing all signals and evaluating the signals day by day. And that's where we are. We are in a completely, geopolitically, we are in a completely uncharted water scenario right now. We are trying to give you probabilities for scenarios. Scenarios are not prognosis for the future. Scenarios are just structured future projections, that's all. And right now we are in this prolonged war scenario. We've moved from short victory towards prolonged war scenario. There are two positive signals for you. One is the US-China summit. And the messaging coming from China is that this summit is taking place. This could be one strong signal for you that Trump and Xi Jinping might agree on something about Iran. And another strong signal for you in the upcoming months, in springtime, would be some sort of success coming out from the trilateral talks on Ukraine, that some sort of agreement or ceasefire is reached on Ukraine. That will, of course, be also a very strong bullish signal. And third strong signal will be the pressure coming. Again, I see no incentive on behalf of Russia, for instance, to push for opening of Hormuz. I see partial incentive on behalf of China to push for the opening of Hormuz, but of course, third strong signal for you will be the regional or maybe collective pressure on behalf of group of countries to kind of bring about a change in the situation. For instance, one is the idea of having a kind of escorted tankers. Again, I will argue that the risk is very high that one or other tanker could be hit by a drone. That could be one possibility. Other one would be some sort of collective escorted tankers collectively through a group of countries and so on and so forth.
Thank you very much for the answer, Velina. In the interest of time, I'm going to have to let David take the show. Maybe one last question. David, I'll let you decide if you want to give one last question or not, given the
Sure,
time.
why not? Yeah, no, if we have
Okay,
engagement,
I do
go
not
for it.
see the hands. Is Timothy who has the hand up?
It's
Yeah,
deep.
Okay.
Oh,
Go
go
ahead,
ahead,
Timothy.
Timothy, and then we'll go to deep.
I just wanted to ask a quick question on the European front. So obviously, we've discussed it over the past few weeks, and I mean the last week especially. I mean Europe is going to bear the brunt again. I think an already stretched Europe with the lack of natural resources, but also we had Anas on the show a couple of times, and he's been posting a lot about it as well. That there's a bit of a bidding war going on the LNG tankers between Europe and Asia. So basically, who's got the most money? And it seems like Asia is winning or China is winning because their financials are a bit better. So since you're a bit closer to leadership in Europe, Velina, and you're also in Vienna, I was wondering if you have any insights. How is Europe going to deal with this from a financial point of view? Because I think it's going to cost us a lot of money. And I mean, as you know as well, our financials are already not very stellar looking. So I was wondering if you have any idea on how they're going to tackle this.
Timothy is from Belgium, just to let you know. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm afraid that they are going to tackle it in a similar way they tackled the energy / commodities crisis that hit Europe actually immediately following the beginning of the Russian war against Ukraine. I don't think that they are now having a better or more adequate mindset to face this kind of realities. There is a combination of ideologically driven policies. I mean, they don't want to give up on some of their ideologies, for instance, linked to decarbonization, because that will mean that they would be wrong, which we know for a fact that in the short term, the prioritization is simply wrong. Today, I've heard that they are going to bet on nuclear and they are going to start investing in the small modular reactors, which is in itself good news. But then again, you have to ask yourself, what took you 4 years? Why didn't you actually introduce these initiatives 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when it was really urgent? When it comes to gas, again, the big issue here is it's so ideological. For 4 long years, they have been claiming that they will be launching these kind of sanctions against Russia. Meanwhile, we've ended up with 20 packages of sanctions, and yet they are still fighting. And I'm really cynical right now, fighting to diversify away from Russian gas, pipeline gas, and LNG. And as we speak right now, Europe has been the sole and biggest buyer of the Arctic LNG from Russia, ahead of the deadline for stopping the LNG. And we had 13% share of Russian pipeline and LNG gas in the whole gas supply, which I argue that right now with this war will be impossible to slash, because as you rightfully pointed out, we will be competing with the Asian countries on the global markets, and we'll be actually competing for more because we have depleted storage. We have the lowest storage in the last 3 years because we had longer and much harsher winter. And for the last 2 years, we put ourselves also at the mercy of mild winters. And by the way, nobody is talking actually about the other implication, which was that we had to reduce energy demand by 10 to 15% per year, which of course hit our energy intensive companies and so on and so forth. So it's like, it gives me, when I start talking about this topic, because this topic is endless, and when I have to list all these really stupid policies, really short-sighted policies and reactions on behalf of our European states, I get really emotional because it cannot be so stupid. But in the end, I mean, the sum of all these decisions and policies shows actually a very dire picture. So in that sense, I think that they will be just going back to reflex and what they used to do in the past is what they're going to do in the future. This morning I had conversations. I proposed that they should also relaunch. They had this platform up until 2023 for collective gas purchase. Smaller states which have no chance on the global markets. When you have to purchase like 3-4 BCM, you have no chance on the market. So they have manage this platform to get all these kind of smaller purchases and to collectively purchase gas, which was actually a good thing to do. So the commission purchases on behalf of states, and in that sense, you have like a bigger amount to get on the markets, which of course creates incentivize suppliers. And last point, gas production. I mean, we are so ideologically driven that it's impossible even to disseminate a smart initiative, which in short term will be gas production in Europe, right? I'm expecting that we will see gas production, we will see nuclear renaissance, we will see diversification, we will see Russian gas still flowing, Russian oil still flowing to Europe. I'm really interested how they will politically sell this, but this is the reality. So you have like a significant gap between ideology and constructivism in Europe and reality on the other side. And this is where we are.
Thank you very much, Velina. I yield the floor to you, David.
Oh, I see Deep has his hand up. He hasn't joined us before on stage, but Deep, please go ahead if you have a question for Velina.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I don't have much of a question, but I did have a brief comment that I just wanted to make. Look, the gentleman doesn't seem to be here anymore, but look, regarding China, I very much see this as a long-term game for them, and until and unless they actually catch up to technological parity with the West, I don't actually see them doing certain asymmetrical types of actions in not just the region but the world, and that includes Taiwan. The Silicon Shield is very real. TSMC does have a global monopoly on chip production and chip restrictions, whether people like it or not, in the Chinese perspective of things. It does have a material impact on their ability to actually move into the island, not just for their economy, but for the sake of the globally interconnected economy as well. And then, of course, they cannot produce their own variant of chips because of ASML kind of not exporting that EUV latest generation machines to actually make those chips to China itself. So, it is very much a long-term game. And then, the idea that the U.S., I think Carlo was asking this question too, is like whether the U.S. is a global player or not, like a completely global unipolar player or not. I mean, even if I was to say that the world could be subtly multipolar, I don't think we can ignore the sheer amount of you could say soft power and hard power the U.S. along with its allied network, right? Europe, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan have on the entire kind of global sphere. And the U.S. will always be active, in my opinion, with the sheer amount of military bases it has, military might it has, and then economic might that it has. And the economic might is not specific, really quickly, just to the size of the economy, but again, critical technologies that I think are going to be driving the future. And of course, the building blocks of all of those technologies come back to microchips, advanced electronics, and the ability to actually produce and control the supply chain. So that is something to be more mindful of. And then regarding rare earths as well, the U.S. share of rare earths has also been going up and getting more diversified with packed silica. I think China now has about a 69.8% share of actually kind of processing these rare earths compared to a much higher stake just a few years ago. And then, of course, the U.S. is investing more in rare earth mines domestically here, too. So, to all these multipolarists out there, I mean, you have to understand that, there's a significant technological barrier that still exists that China isn't able to overcome. And then just the last thing regarding Iran, I personally don't see this thing kind of being over anytime soon. I think the ability to conduct asymmetrical warfare is a very long, drawn out process. And one thing that Iran kind of has learned over the years is kind of waging low impact warfare via its drones and kind of learning to preserve kind of some of the longer range missile technology that they have for later. I do concede though that I do believe the U.S. has significantly lowered, you could say, the conventional Iranian military, but the way Iran was able to conduct damage across the Middle East and through the region with its proxies is very much through low cost, low impact kind of warfare with these Shahed drones that they launch. So just be mindful of the drone attacks in the region, and of course the IRGC having this longer term vision of if we go down, we'll just take as much of the collateral damage to the rest of the GCC and kind of choke point the world in global energy supply. So that is something to be very mindful of and weary of in coming kind of days and weeks. Despite, of course, the conventional capacity that was there, and of course, Iran didn't have much of an air force. Really quickly, to begin with, they were using a lot of outdated pre-sanctions Shah era aircraft. A lot of the stuff that you could say they've been lethal with is very much their you could say ballistic missiles combined with these drones, and they've been kind of waging quite a bit of damage on these Middle Eastern countries, these GCC countries. So, yeah, I do think this is a longer crisis than people anticipated to be. So I just wanted to make those points. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Deep. And for the title, we have the title "War Over." Probably not. Just want to answer to that because we have this in the title, David. Velina, thank you very much for coming into this space today. We appreciate it very much. David, it is your time because I think we have 15 minutes left. So I'll let you decide how we proceed forward.
Yeah, sure. Let's go back to some additional company news in the spirit of warring competitors that I spoke about earlier regarding Novo and HIMS, and then a little bit of Live Nation and the government. ACHR Aviation and JOBY Aviation. So I'm not in either of these stocks. I never have been in either of these stocks. Personal aircraft and flying taxis, electric flying taxis. In any event, ACHR has sued Joby Aviation with some pretty spectacular allegations. So both of these companies went public through SPACs, led by, I would say, notable folks. The Joby SPAC, Reid Hoffman of LinkedIn, and then Mark Pincus of Zynga led that SPAC, and then Ken Moelis of Moelis and Company, the investment bank, sponsored the SPAC that merged with Archer. Archer has claimed that Joby is the older company. Archer founded in 2018, Joby founded in 2009. And in any event, Archer has now sued Joby for years of deceiving federal regulators and investors by concealing extensive ties to Chinese suppliers. That has all of the buzzwords in it, in terms of A, avoiding tariffs, B, conspiring with the enemy, giving away potentially, sensitive information, so on and so forth. So this is an explosive a set of allegations. Look, we have duopolies in a lot of industries and a lot of technology industries, frankly, Uber and Lyft, let's call it. In the self-driving taxi space, we've got a number of players also. Whether you come out against your competitor that heavy-handed and try to wipe them out in that way or hamper them in that way, or you go ahead and just fight against them on the revenue and profitability playing field, is really, I would obviously depend on the circumstances and the facts that you've got. But this is clearly something that is now, at least from the way the allegations have been made, this is definitely a dividing line between these two companies. By the way, with all due respect to Joby and Archer, as we find in a lot of industries, all of a sudden someone bigger, deeper pocketed can immediately come in and just take over the entire thing. And that third wheel can effectively wipe out the two upstarts. So, we'll see how this goes. It'll be very interesting. This is a space that a lot of people have been focused on. It's going to get a lot of attention leading up to the next Olympic Games out in California. But nevertheless, this is just another circle in the circus that goes on between these two companies. In addition, pivoting for a second to the oil and gas market. In addition to everything going on the macro stage and with respect to prices, Exxon Mobil, which has been in New Jersey, incorporated in New Jersey for 144 years, is leaving and going to, drumroll please, Texas. And there we go, another large company. I mean, it doesn't make sense at this point for Exxon to be in New Jersey. It really should be in Texas, if anywhere in the United States. And so that makes a lot of sense. The move simply goes ahead and builds momentum for what we've already seen in terms of moves down to Texas. In addition to that move in the energy space, Shell, which has been divesting itself of a lot of assets around the world. I wish Anas was here. Maybe we'll catch up with him on this when he comes back on. Shell has been coming back to its core business, which is more natural gas than it is oil. And then the downstream part, which is the gas station part. It owns Jiffy Lube in the United States, oil changing place. Anyway, it is selling Jiffy Lube to a private equity firm for $1.3 billion. In earnings, Kohl's reported this morning worse than expected sales for the quarter, continuing to struggle to revive. Lots of different things have been tried out inside of Kohl's in terms of inside stores and having boutiques and so on. And it just hasn't helped them, returning Amazon packages it's helped foot traffic, but hasn't led to increased sales. So lots of things still to be fixed there. In line with capital raising, especially for AI and for data centers. Amazon, right? We recently saw uh, Google raise $50 billion in the debt markets. Amazon is now raising roughly $40 billion in debt, anywhere from, I think the shortest tenor is somewhere around 5 years, longest tenor out to 50 years. So we're not getting century bonds, but we're getting half a century bonds with Amazon, $40 billion. The money is not there. The money needs to be raised. Everybody needs to raise the money. Again, we've spoken about the fact that SoftBank is raising debt in order to meet its investment pledge to OpenAI. Obviously, the likes of Amazon and Google, Microsoft are going to be able to access public markets a lot easier than the private companies are going to be able to. And so they've got to go ahead and do this in order to live up to their commitments and the next stage of growth that's expected in the industry. I saw that Brandon was here. I think he's now left. But I need to mention, in the wake of everything that happened last week with the Pentagon and Anthropic has now sued the Pentagon um, over the designation that it is, quote, a supply chain risk. The basis for the allegations, or I should say the legal grounds, are that it, quote, it violates the company's First Amendment rights and exceeds the government's authority. This is going to be an interesting case if it goes anywhere, because of the fact that it it really puts a focus on things that come out of this administration's mouth. And this administration says a lot of things. And if this is something, I mean, this is obviously very pointed, but labeling it a supply chain risk effectively sidelines the company from a lot of business. And so it really is, there is, allegedly serious damages, monetary damages that comes from this. And this will be, it's going to take a long time to go ahead and prosecute this. But nevertheless, I would say a very interesting case of constitutional um, application. So we will. I'll keep you posted on where, on where things go from there. Dave Nicoski, curious about yesterday's market moves. Did you make any moves? Are you making any moves today as a result of the whiplash that happened yesterday?
Yeah, I took some shorts off yesterday. Been short for a little over a week and a half. I'm watching high credit spreads right now. They did take out the November highs. We're sitting at 325.80. It's not completely worrisome unless we continue to break out to new highs. That's about a 7 to 8 month high. X triple C is getting really close to the April lows when you compare it to HYG. I mean, the bottom rung of credit is not worth the paper it's written on. Goldman Sachs came out yesterday and said that they're developing a product for institutions to short corporate credit. So there's obviously demand there, and they're being asked about it, so they're creating a product for it. So those are the things that are troubling me. Sitting back watching the entire market. Doug Cass has been pretty prominent on where he sits. I agree a lot with what he says. Hopefully I can try to get him on the show. I know he's been on here once or twice before. Those are the things that concern me the most. Um, I think that if we see high yield credit blowout, it's going to be a multiple compression, across the market if that happens. And again, it's a big if. I don't want to paint myself as a bull or bear. Like I said, I'm a bull and bear. and in the right things when I, hopefully need to be. Fertilizers look great. Refiners continue to look good. The oil trade, obviously, that was a big whiplash. The G7 came out and said they were going to release from the SPR, and then they voted against it, and energy came down anyhow. So I still like the prospects that energy will be higher, or stay at elevated levels longer, barring a recession. I think that's, what was interesting yesterday is oil came back and the energy stocks actually traded up. And I think that removed the uncertainty that a recession was going to happen. But just about every energy stock that I own was actually closed near the highs of the day. So keep that in mind. As I think the fears that it was going to go significantly higher. Most of the stocks have traded down over the last week, and they all bounced yesterday and closed near their highs, just to give people some thoughts on that. So I'm a buyer on pullbacks. I'm not chasing up candles by any means in this market. If you look at the skew index, you'll see the skew on individual stocks, I believe, is at all-time highs. That is, investors are trying to do anything, and they're being shoved into a corner and being forced to cover. And that's not a market. That's a market that's really highly emotional. And when you get into that type of atmosphere, investors are really struggling to make money, in my opinion, from the rotations. So that just adds an element that we don't see very often with skews at this level. So I'm going to be more prudent and be not ready to chase things. And that's
Excellent.
how I would ascertain the market conditions right now.
Sounds good to me. Just to go ahead and kind of wrap up as where we are this morning, futures are down just a tad. Again, we had a tremendous reversal yesterday. Closed, solidly green. Gold is sitting above 5,200 now. Silver below 90. Brent is below 90. And I think that, folks will be hanging on every word that comes out of not only this White House, but also to see what happens with respect to the Iranian activity over the trading day. By the way, one last point. Interestingly, as strong as the US dollar has been since the war started, the Israeli shekel has been incredibly strong, stronger than the US dollar. It has gained strength on the dollar, and the Israeli stock market since the beginning of the war has been up something like 10%. It is up 75% or so over the past year. So really, when it comes to what you'd think the fallout from conflict would be, this has been somewhat counterintuitive. In any event, folks, I'm going to go ahead and leave it there for today. We'll be back here tomorrow to go ahead and discuss it all, probably a more traditional show. But thanks to Velina for joining us. Thanks for Eric. Thanks to Eric for inviting her. Hopefully, more of our panelists, get their internal clocks changed properly so they're here on time tomorrow morning. And we will greet you with a great show once again tomorrow at 8 a.m. See you then, folks. Have a great day. Take care.